Welcome, friends. You're listening to Breakfast in the Ruins, a Michael Moorcock flavoured podcast. On this show, we're taking our final look at Moorcock in RPGs, at least for now. The third part of this triptych includes a good gab with Rob, aka Menyon, host of the Confessions of a Wee Tim'rous Bushi podcast, as we pick up on a brief Twitter conflab he started about Mike's influence on Dungeons & Dragons. Then I'll be joined by some of the crew that laid themselves open to an experiment. When we took our first look at Stormbringer, the role-playing game, last year, Loz, Phil and I made a few observations about Games Workshop's version of the third edition of that Stormbringer RPG by Steve Perrins and Ken St. Andre. That, whilst not really chiming with something that we felt was exactly Moorcockian, it did make me really want to run it as written. Well, we did so, and some brave players put themselves forth to subject themselves to my rusty games mastering. Neil, Norman and Graham gamely share their thoughts not only on Stormbringer 3rd edition, but also on what they'd like to see from a game that really explores Mike's oeuvre a little bit more. Around about the time these segments were recorded, Loz and I were invited to play an introductory game of Houses of the Blooded, after we'd had a quick Twitter chat with Tanya Floker. Now, Tanya's used that game in the past to run a game based around Melnibonéan nobles, and I have to say, I thought it was really terrific, as were the other players. So thanks, Tanya. It was really incredibly generous of you to offer. You were a great GM, and the experience really made me think about narrative, story-focused gaming in quite a different way. Also, following our last RPG-focused episode with Ralph from the Fixoplasm podcast, I played in his Stormhack convention game and had a great time, also managing to put some faces to Twitter handles along the way. So, it's been a very gamey few weeks here at Derry and Tom's, but soon we'll be getting back to the grand Moorcock reread. For now though, join Rob and I in Derry and Tom's as we take one last journey, for now at least, into Moorcock's influence on the world of gaming. Okay, I'm back in Derry and Tom's roof garden, and Ralph has just gone down in the lift, and who popped out of the other lift? Well, it's Rob, aka Menyon, aka host of Confessions of a Wee Tim'rous Bushi podcast. Welcome, Rob, to Derry and Tom's.
Nice to be here, yeah. I feel really nervous now. That was a really professional introduction.
Sorry, because I've had a couple of breakfast beers that it sounds that way, so I wouldn't worry about it. The professionalism will soon slip, I'm sure.
Oh, thank goodness for that.
So, a few weeks back, you posted something on Twitter that started us having a conversation that I think prompted us to set this up and have this conversation, because, of course, as you know, we did an episode last year on Moorcockian RPGs, and we're following that up shortly. But first of all, whenever we have a new guest or co-host, the initial question, as always, is, what's your history with Moorcock, Rob?
My history with Moorcock. I think the first time I probably saw Moorcock's work, or something related to Moorcock's work, would have been in the Deities and Demigods book for Advanced Dungeons and Dragons.
Very fitting.
I don't know. Yeah. You probably can't see that because of the green screen. It's a blue book.
Yeah. So is that the original edition with Elric in
that's
it?
It's not the posh one.
Oh.
This was printed in 1980, and maybe we can talk about this if you haven't talked about this previously. I can't remember if you did, but for contractual reasons, it was chopped out of the book. And this is published in May 1980.
Just for those listeners who aren't RPGers, because we do have listeners who don't fit that central point of the Venn diagram, Deities and Demigods was a source book, wasn't it, for Advanced Dungeons and Dragons in the late 1970s, and it had all sorts of bits and pieces in it. Explain what the history of those kind of forbidden portions of Deities and Demigods were that became almost legendary because they were removed.
This book was published, as I said, like in May 1980 or roundabouts that time. And according to interviews that I've heard from James Ward and Rob Kuntz, who are the people that put this book together, they had basically permission from Michael Moorcock and also from the was it Lovecraft, H.P. Lovecraft Foundation, or whoever's in charge of that IP, to use Melnibonéan mythos and the Call of Cthulhu, the Cthulhu mythos in this book, which otherwise is, for people who don't know, it's full of It's mostly real-world mythology and legends, heroes and gods from Celtic mythology or Indian mythology, Egyptian and Greek, and all these things. But there's a few that are drawn from literature, and one of the ones that I didn't get cut in the end. I'm kind of jumping forward here, but it was the Newen mythos. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly, but that's the Fritz Lieber, Grey Mouser, and Fafard. If that's pronounced correctly.
Yeah, I have always wondered myself, how do you pronounce it? I've no idea. New one, no clue. Right. But then it wouldn't be heroic fantasy if you didn't have problems pronouncing certain things.
Yeah, as we know, right? I'm not even sure if I pronounced Melnibonian correctly.
Let's just say you did.
Right, let's just say I did. So the first and second printing had these two sections, the Cthulhu mythos and the Melnibonian mythos, because apparently they had permission directly from Moorcock, actually, with regard to the Melnibonian one. Yeah, he said, oh, sure, go ahead and use it, is what I've heard. And then there was a problem with another company. So TSR was the company that was that held the rights to Dungeons and Dragons back in the day that was printing this material. And there was another role-playing game company called Chaosium Incorporated. Chaosium is still around today, and they produce games like, well, Stormbringer, which you've talked about before, RuneQuest, Pendragon, and also Call of Cthulhu, which is, again, Lovecraft. So there ended up this kind of, seems to be, well, we don't know if it's really a spat, but there was some kind of problem relating to who owns the rights to Cthulhu and Melnibonian, the Elric stuff, the Stormbringer and all that. And something happened and it was dropped in the third print. So this is the third print. That's your answer. So it's not in here. But why I know it's the third print is because it still says it's in there. So in the preface, it says, special thanks are also given to Chaosium Inc. for permission to use the material found in the Cthulhu mythos and the Melnibonian mythos.
Right. Okay.
So that was message there was put into the second and third prints. The second print still had those sections, but the third print, like this, it's missing. Yeah. So it's like a real oddball book. So there's one other thing that may be worthwhile pulling out of this is a comment by James Ward, who's luckily is one of the old guard that are still with us today and still making games. He says, alignments were perhaps the hardest AD&D concept to deal with, and the one that will have the most debate among the interested users of this work. Beings like Set, Loki, and Ariok are easy to classify, but when working with the middle-of-the-road deities, who are often chaotic but known for consistent kindness, or were rogues of the worst sort but very companionable, it became necessary to consider them as a whole to make a judgment. Blah, 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 right? Yeah. But I love this, he's saying, well, Ariok's really easy to judge, and I'm assuming they put him into chaotic evil or something like that. But the whole problem, we can call it a problem, not necessarily a bad problem, but the problem of alignment really starts to become apparent in Advanced Dungeons and Dragons, because before this, you had law, and you had chaos, and you had neutrality, which is, really Michael Moorcock. Yeah, we'll leave off the days and demigods there for a moment.
That's one of the interesting things that often pops up when people talk about the influence of Moorcock on role-playing games, and particularly and D&D in particular, is the whole alignment thing, isn't it? And in a way, you've kind of got to take your hat off to them for trying to maybe not implement something, because I don't know of any other role-playing game that ever really implemented an alignment system, because I think most people just cast it off as either unplayable or unenforceable, because you can never really keep players on track. I mean, there is an argument that most players at some point end up chaotic evil for whatever reason, for pursuit of treasure or anything else. But I think the fact that they actually made an attempt to delineate or differentiate between the fact that some people who followed perhaps a lawful path could be good or evil, and that didn't necessarily dictate anything, does to some extent reflect what goes on in a lot of Moorcock stuff, where later on Coram does find actually, because Coram doesn't really recognise law and chaos, it's kind of alien to Vadhaka culture, but he kind of realises that there is these beings, these forces of law, these forces of chaos, there's the balance, and actually good or evil is almost irrelevant to someone like Ariok. But
Right,
also very
right.
interesting. And I can imagine back in the day, if I'd have got Deities and Demigods 3rd edition and that text had referred to Ariok and Ariok wasn't actually in the bulk of the book, that would have sent me off on a wild goose chase to try and find out what that was all about, which in itself is actually very Moorcockian and quite satisfying. So, yeah.
Nowadays it would be a big Twitter battle, wouldn't there? There would be lots of like complaints being shot at TSR.
Yes, it would very much. So you discovered Moorcock through Deities and Demigods.
This is right. That's right. I dodged the question.
You did,
but that was probably the first time I noticed it. But I didn't know about Michael Moorcock at the time. So I remember seeing these pictures of the Cthulhu stuff, which isn't Moorcock, so we'll leave that there. But I also saw Moonglum and Elric, and they've got these big flares on. I think it's the drawings are by probably Errol Otis.
right?
Maybe they're not. Maybe they're not. Those ones aren't. But anyway, these big flares and a real 70s kind of like vibe going with the black and white ink drawings for those characters. And so I wouldn't have really known what Melnibonian was, other than it was really looked quite difficult to pronounce. I think it had a little accent or something. And so some years later, my friend, one of the friends that I role played with extensively, various other games that I won't mention just now, but he started getting I think it was the Golance editions of the Elric books, and they're kind of like a white background with a probably red or black print, I think it was, and quite striking color images on the front of this kind of like weak-looking, kind of anguished albino character, and it was. I remember it being so striking, and he'd got the whole bunch or something, and I just started reading it too. And I was sucked into it because I think I'd read anything like it. Before that, I'd read Tolkien. And Tolkien, he's writing for completely different reasons. And he's writing for a different audience, if he's writing for an audience at all, which is arguable, can't remember if it was Sailors on the Seas of Fate that I read first. But I remember that the combat scenes were so bloody and so fast, really fast. And then the other things that struck me was this sense of this doom-laden hero, and that he couldn't do anything right. He was killing the people he loved, and there was something, I suppose, and many other people on your show have mentioned this before, that really appealed to me, I suppose, I must have been 13 or 14, I suppose, when I was reading this stuff. And the person, the idea of a central character who is completely incompetent, socially inept, probably appealed to me.
Yeah,
it was exciting, and then there was this sense of somebody being somehow heroic, but at the same time a complete idiot and inept. And also, it had this sort of drive to it that was quite. It wasn't like anything I'd come across before. It had this there was something very philosophical about it, as well at the same time as being something like really muscular, masculine and aggressive. There was also a sort of almost like an opposite pole to that. That was very like metaphysical, and the actual reality of the world wasn't as important as that sort of metaphysical search or that metaphysical quest, the quest that Elric was on. That's probably how I came across Elric, and I think I was hooked, and I was led on to Corum and Hawk Moon and some Jerry Cornelius and all that stuff.
His characters engage in quests, and we're just finding that at the moment that a lot of his books do devolve into what Loz and I have been referring to as quest mode for a very large portion of the middle 60 or 70% of a trilogy or a quadrilogy falls into quest mode. But there's always something kind of transgressive compared to the other things that I was reading at the time. Whilst in some cases, things like the final program were very progressive, his kind of core fantasy quest mode stuff really doesn't fit the pattern of anything else comparable, and I think that's probably what made it completely stick out to 13 and 14 year olds of our vintage, quite apart from the fact that the combat scenes are great. The combat scenes are absolutely fantastic, but it
was better than Conan, wasn't it?
I mean, Robert E. Howard was a great writer of action, but Moorcock somehow manages to distill it down even further. I mean, compared to Moorcock, Robert E. Howard, some I mean, you'd never say this in comparing Robert E. Howard to anybody else, but some of Robert E. Howard's prose tends to be flowery compared to Moorcock, who's very in the 60s and early 70s at least, was very driven and very direct and very to the point, yet whilst maintaining something just completely different from anything else. Mm-hmm. Now, you have your own podcast, of course, and we've touched on Moorcock and we've talked about Dungeons and Dragons, but you have your own podcast, Confessions of a Wee Tim'rous Bushi.
That's right, yeah.
Which is really it's your reflections more broadly on your experiences of role-playing games, Dungeons and Dragons most particularly, I think. But how did that come about?
I think it's like a lot of people of our age, perhaps, and who've come through the various interests and hobbies that we did as children, and then return to those interests. So in the case of role-playing games, I left the hobby probably when I went to university because I had other things that were on my mind or that I was involved with. And, well, long story short, I mean, I travelled and I lived in different countries and I got married and I had a kid, and my kid is now 19, and I've suddenly, for the past year or so, I've had more time to reflect on things. And I think coming back to a hobby has been a way of not escaping reality, not escapism so much as trying to get back into touch with people and talk to people, and whether you're discussing a book or football or whatever it might be, if you've got some kind of interest in common with other people, you instantly feel a sort of camaraderie that sort of that makes other things seem a little bit more seem inconsequential. And the past few years there've been a lot of things going on in the world, in Britain or in America or where else, that have been quite divisive, really, socially quite divisive. Whether those divisions are natural or not, well, we don't need to go in really. But I think getting to the game was a way of getting away from that, and also saying, well, I'm not just a thing that goes to work, and I'm not just a thing that is controlled by whatever is happening in the world. I'm a human being. There's things that interest me, excite me, that rouse my passions and that. And there's other people who are also interested in these things. So I thought, well, I was listening to Dirk the Dice, who does the Grognard Files, like many other people.
Absolutely.
And the Grognard Files, as you know, is about role-playing games and rediscovering them. And I thought, what struck me about that was that he was talking about his hobby from his perspective. And it wasn't somebody like... It wasn't a documentary about these great people. It wasn't about Gary Gygax, or who was the founder of D&D, if you don't know, or Michael Moorcock. It was about him and his relation to his hobby and his friends and what they were doing at that time and what they're doing now. And I suddenly sort of realized that, whether people listen to it or not, it's kind of nice to put your history or your feelings, your present, into some kind of coherent form, and that this technology actually wasn't that complicated. So you can just do it on your phone, So that's what started me.
Yeah, I think that the Grognard Files is definitely for me it's a podcast touchstone. I'd been exposed to podcasts some years ago, because we all commute and do other things and we've got time to kill. And I always listen to music, and I tried podcasts at one point, but I found that the people who did them tended to have a really kind of heightened temptation to be heightened and behave in a heightened way and try and make it a performance. And I'd been listening to a couple of RPG podcasts, one of which I still listen to from time to time, actually, called System Mastery, which I do enjoy. But they tend to fall into a habit of needing to go yuck, yuck, yuck on at least a regular basis, even though they do have some really excellent insights into role-playing games, and they are very amusing, they're very funny. But I found the Grognard Files was the first thing I came across, as well as one called Space Spinner 2000, which is done by a couple of American lads, one of whom I think lives in Europe, and they're basically going through 2000 AD issue by issue, or prog by prog. Wow. And it's absolutely fantastic. So you've got one guy who's an American guy who's read a lot of 2000 AD, and his mate who's never read any, going through 2000 AD and prog by prog, and it was great. And I was listening to that and the Grognard Files around the same time. And the Grognard Files, you're absolutely right. You've got a couple of guys, Northerners, which automatically makes me feel at home, just having steady, gentle conversations about things that they love without feeling any essential requirement to perform. They're just relaxed, naturally humorous and gentle. And of course, there's a whole community, not just around the Grognard Files, but there's a role-playing game player community which consists of a lot of people, I think a lot like ourselves and a lot like the Grognard File gang, who went through years and years and years apart from the hobby and then rediscovered it and have a joy of talking about it. And I must say, in the last year to 18 months particularly, with everything being locked down for the reasons we're fully aware of, that sense of community and that sense of being able to talk to people, just like we are doing now on the far side of the world, about hobbies and interests that we really enjoy, is really fantastic. And there's a purity to it, and there's a real pleasure to it, which I think is a combination of not just shared interests, but actually having the technology available, having the ability to do things like podcasts, which I think is it's really positive. It's incredibly positive, because he talked earlier on about there being a lot of divisiveness for a lot of reasons around politics, around responses to pandemics and everything else. But actually there are certain things which, when you have common interests, all that stuff becomes less important. And actually it just becomes about connecting. And that's what I think is really great about this kind of community and about podcasting in general, and particularly podcasting around specific interests.
Yeah, I think the podcasts that I'm involved with, most of the ones that I listen to are very, I'm not going to say amateur, because that's like putting you down, isn't it? Or Dirk the Dice down.
Well, we're all hobbyists, aren't we? We're just hobbyists.
Yeah. What I like is, as you say, that it's not a performance. Some of them are. There's a lot of shows, as you know, with role-playing games, it's becoming much more commercial. It's like $1 billion industry now, isn't it? Multi-billion-dollar industry. It's a completely different world now from what it was when we were kids and got into it. Whether that's good or not, well, I'm sure there's lots of good things about that. It spills over, but there's also this element where people feel like they have to sell themselves, and you have to create this polished product. And some people say, well, could you improve the sound quality, or don't you think you should create a more polished sort of like script and all these elements? Where the people I'm involved with, particularly it's like the Anchor. I use the Anchor app, and we call ourselves the Anchorite community, the Anchorites, and a lot of, not everybody, but a lot of what they do is they call it guerrilla podcasting. Guerrilla as in not as in the ape, but as in a strike, as in an attack. And the idea is you just record. I mean, you might record when you're walking somewhere in the car. You throw things together. Obviously, there's editing going on as well, but you put stuff down and don't worry too much about it being a bit sloppy. And there's a bit of a punk sort of ideal, I suppose, behind it as well. Just making our own stuff for our own friends, and then there's a conversation that develops around that, because people can call in. So I find that really exciting, the fact that ordinary people can take the reins and they're able to exercise a little bit of creativity in the spaces that we have, and it doesn't necessarily have to produce any value. I think that was one of the first things that I put in my earlier podcast, was that the idea of producing something that doesn't actually have any monetary value seemed really important to me, to produce something that had not to get too Marxist for you people, because I know but something that has social value, but I wasn't prepared to put an actual value on it, like a price value on it, and just giving it out. And just that thing is because I work in an office, and I work in an industry that's actually, not to go into too much detail, but is very much connected to the commercial world. It's nice to be able to do that, to do something that's sort of like you're just connecting with people, as you say, on a more, I don't know, more human level, I suppose. Like, I mean, it's not ideal, but nothing ever is it? We're going to get to Utopia, aren't we, at some point, and Tanalorn, if we can continue going this direction.
Yeah, I think 2 weeks on Thursday, with any luck. That's my projection. I'm usually wrong in these projections, but I've had a couple of breakfast beers, so I'm feeling positive.
Okay. What are you drinking, by the way? Isn't this about the time we trade? Are you on the L's, or what are you drinking?
I'm drinking Krug Brau Black Lager. So a while back, I went and met some friends of mine in Chesterfield. Because, of course, another one of the wonderful things about internet and social media and technology is people that you fall out of touch with for years and years and years on end, you can suddenly trip across on social media almost by accident. But anyway, old friend of mine, Johnny Royale from back in the day in Hull, I went to meet him for a few beers and another lad, and we went to a pub just near the station in Chesterfield. And I don't think it's a German pub, it's a German-themed pub where you can get steins of German beer and large German sausages and mustard and all that. So it's right up my street, because if you can combine decent beer and sausages, I'm in hog heaven. But anyway, they served black lager, and the last time I'd had black lager was Loz and I and Robbo, who was on our Wheels of Terror episode a couple of weeks ago, went to Prague in 1994. And spent a fortnight in Prague. And the bars in Prague essentially did 2 beers. Some of them only did 1. They just did whatever local Pilsner that they did. But some would do a second beer, and that was a black Pilsner or a black lager. Mm. And I hadn't had it since then, so we were in this pub in Chesterfield about 18 months ago drinking steins of black lager. And essentially it's made by the same process as lager, but it uses a certain kind of hops and whatever ingredients to give it a more kind of roasted hops flavour and a dark, and it's absolutely delicious. I love it. So I've been looking on we're really going off on a tangent here, but I've been looking on the internet
it's good.
For the last 18 months to try and find black lager, and whenever I found black lager, it was always out of stock. But anyway, I've been, since lockdowns happened, I've been buying beer from a company called Beer Sniffer, who have a really good selection of beers.
And some name, isn't it?
Yeah, and I subscribe to their email list, and from time to time I'll get an email saying X is in stock, and I'll go, ooh, I do like X, and I'll buy it. But a couple of weeks ago I got one saying Krugbrau Black Lager is in stock. So I was like, oh my god, Black Lager. So I ordered 24 bottles, and and it's absolutely fantastic. So I'm delighted to be drinking a lovely black lager for, well, the second time in, I don't know, 27 years.
so what does it taste like? Is it more, so we're really following the Moonbeam roads now, aren't we? What does it taste like? Is it more like, it's obviously not like a stout, it's not heavy, it's more like a...
No, I would say...
it's caramel kind of lager? Or?
Yeah, it's more like a porter, but with a lager-like liveliness, not fizzy crap like Foster's or something like that. But it's got it's like a lively porter. So it's 5%, and it's got a liveliness to it. It's got a head on it, and it's just a cracking beer, I've got to say. So yeah, it's kind of like a mildly fizzy porter.
Can I show me your bowl, or show you mine?
Okay. That's a deal.
This isn't really helpful, is it? Because nobody can actually see this. But
I'll take a photograph of my beer bottle. You take a photograph of yours, and I'll put them in the show notes.
All right, we'll do it afterwards.
Yeah.
So I'm drinking Mugito Hop, which is it's not actually a beer. It doesn't actually class as a beer under Japanese law.
Right.
So it's by Sapporo, which is one of the big 3. There's actually more now. There's 4 big beer companies. There used to be just 3 big companies. And Sapporo was established probably just after the Russian-Japanese War, back at the turn of the 20th century or something like that, where Japan at the time was an ally of the United Kingdom. And a lot of the naval ships came from there. Anyway, the sailors needed beer, and they needed... and a curry actually entered via the British Navy, because presumably they used curry on the in Asia or the Indian Navy. Anyway, hang on. So basically, the ingredients don't qualify as a beer. Presumably, there's not enough hops in there or something like that. It's kind of like German law, where you've got certain regulations. So it's 5%. It's very cheap. It's much cheaper than beer, which is, it's like it escapes the beer tax. It's a loophole beer. And that's what I'm drinking. But it's very drinkable. It's fair. Yeah, fair.
Okay, show me the label. I've shown you mine. You got to show me yours. It's your background is messing with it. So.
Right.
Yeah. Sorry. If you get it closer, right? Yeah. Sapporo. Yeah, of course, Sapporo is an international brand as well, isn't it? I've had Sapporo over the years.
Oh, it probably is. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, groovy. So, at some point, wouldn't it be wonderful if technology improves somewhat further, so we could actually exchange beers via the internet, by some kind of matter dematerialization or something.
Yeah.
I'm keeping
Another 30 years?
Yeah, I'm keeping my fingers crossed for that. I'll be retired by then, so I can do it daily. It'd be brilliant. So, one of the reasons, of course, we set this up is you posted on Twitter a while back. We need to bring Michael Moorcock to the attention of new D&D players. His books are a huge influence on D&D, Game of Thrones and The Witcher, without acknowledgement in the latter two cases, yet no one seems conversant in him. Let's redress this. So that's a key question, isn't it? It's a key question. Why has Moorcock become obscure to modern gamers and even, more broadly, younger fantasy fans? Despite the fact, if you cut through modern fantasy, Moorcock is written through it like a stick of rock.
Yeah. I wonder if it's got anything to do with royalties.
Mm.
But that would be, I mean, is it cheaper to publish books by lesser known authors who are like creating works? I don't know. But
it does make you wonder, because if I go in Waterstones in Bradford, when Waterstones is actually open, but let's say for the sake of argument, I go in Waterstones in Bradford. There are fantasy and science fiction novels from the last 20 years, maybe more, collections, all sorts of things, but I can't remember the last time I saw Michael Moorcock on the shelf in a Waterstones, beyond probably finding one of the Pyatt Quartet in the contemporary fiction section. Not in the fantasy or science fiction, but in the contemporary fiction section. So it's absolutely. I mean, obviously, when you're an old school Moorcock fan who's old and grumpy and have been into him for a long time, it's easy to get infuriated by the fact that something like The Witcher gets a TV show, whereas Elric doesn't, etc., etc. We've talked about those things before.
Yeah.
But in preparation for this, I decided to. We spoke about Appendix N before. In fact, we talked to Ralph Lovegrove about it a while back. But I decided to revisit the appendices in D&D 5th edition, which for me is the most homogenous edition of D&D. And, we can talk about how it succeeds and how it fails and everything else, shortly. But I decided to dig out, and of course it's not Appendix N, it's Appendix E in the Player's Handbook, Inspirational Reading. Moorcock's still on there, and it says Michael Moorcock, Elric of Melniboné and the rest of the Elric series, and the Jewel in the Skull and the rest of the Hawkmoon series. Okay, fair enough. Mm-hmm. No mention of Corum or Ericos or the Eternal Champion or anything like that, but they do name check Elric and Hawkmoon in there. So they're still mentioned, but I mean, if you go down the list, there's also... I wouldn't describe this as random, but I would describe it as incredibly specific. August Derleth and H.P. Lovecraft Watches Out of Time. So Watches Out of Time was a Lovecraft fragment that August Derleth completed. Not something I would necessarily recommend to people as great reading material, but it's in, for some reason, the D&D 5th edition Player's Handbook reading list, as is H.P. Lovecraft, The Complete Works. So Lovecraft and Moorcock are still getting those mentions along with the usual ones, which I think are hangovers from Appendix N in the original AD&D, like Clark Ashton Smith and Fletcher Pratt and people like that, and Andre Norton and of course Jack Vance. So it's mentioned in there, but has D&D 5 now got so homogenised that all trace of Moorcock is basically practically invisible?
You're asking the wrong person. I don't play it. So I think that again, there's a generation. There could be a generation problem a year. So, I mean, I started playing 5th edition, but I found the games that I was joining at least didn't really appeal to me, and I'm not sure if that was a system issue or something to do with my expectations of what makes a good adventure. And obviously, playing a role-playing game, it's not like reading fiction, in my opinion. I'm happy for my characters to die. I don't need to sort of develop a story. I think I see things as being more of a group story when I'm role-playing. So I like to see how the group survives, and then if an individual does continue throughout the stories, then you can see that person is a hero. They became a hero for some reason, somehow, right? Developed by some kind of natural development. But what I found in the groups that I joined, and again, I don't want to attack people who are playing 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons, but the assumption was that you were already a hero and that you were an important member of the cast. And so it was like the assumption was that, I mean, it's very difficult. It's not easy to die in the new game. It's quite difficult to die. It felt like I don't know, I felt like I was being put into a story where the story's already been kind of written.
Yeah.
And if you don't have any, if there's no jeopardy, it seems like you're not really free. So I'm not sure if that makes sense, but if there's jeopardy, then it feels like there's nobody in charge of your destiny. We're getting really back to Michael Moorcock perhaps, but if you, the sense of freedom, being free, and to know that somebody isn't control, you're not fated, you're not predestined, is the thing that's really exciting about role-playing games for me. The randomness, the chaos, right?
I do wonder if that's why, because there's you could think for a long time about what makes an RPG Moorcockian, in inverted commas, and there are lots of games, particularly OSR games and independent games these days, that say that they're going for more of a Fritz Leiber or Moorcock feel, but I'm not sure that always follows through, because whilst I mean I think I would tend to agree with you that my experience of D&D 5, and I've played it and I've run it, is that it is quite homogenised. There are things about D&D 5 I really, really like. In some ways, I think the system works pretty well. Yes, the fact that there are so many safeguards there to remove real peril, but they're easily house ruled away. But the actual game itself, the presentation of it all, notwithstanding the fact that it's D&D is still one of the great holdouts for things where you need multiple books if you want to feel like you've got everything you need to play the game. But even that's a fallacy to a degree. You can play D&D 5th edition with a player's handbook and you don't need anything else.
That's true, yeah.
The Dungeon Masters Guide, the Monster Manual, you don't need them. They're nice to have, they're not needs to have. But anyway, that the entire idea of a Moorcockian game, and we're finding this as we read through the books again, and particularly more so than ever with the Corum books, is actually, I really like role-playing games, and I think you probably alluded to this, where actually you have to work really, really hard as a character to make your mark on the world, and it's high risk, high reward, and if you do things wrong, there's the chance of carnage and death. That to me is what makes fantasy role-playing games quite interesting. That's probably why, and my Stormbringer game players at the moment are probably finding this to their cost, is I quite like games where the players are low-powered shit kickers who have to think their way around things, and if they do get into a fight, it's short and violent and bloody and may well end up in someone's death. Yeah. But actually, in a Moorcock book, the heroes are always practically invulnerable. They've always got everything on their side, and destiny basically directs them through a path of travel that they've got very little agency in.
Well, that's why Elric is so miserable, right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Because he has no agency.
Yeah.
The DM, whoever's Michael Moorcock, has stolen his player agency.
That's right. And they end up on a railroad. they're on a railroad through the adventure. And Hawkmoon is basically beholden to the rune staff and undergoes this series of quests, and there's Corum is going through the same. There's always the Deus Ex Machina of whatever demon bound or God's hand or God's eye or magic sword or anything else that gets them through things. The drama and the interest is the fact that what it costs them as people, and that's what makes it interesting. That's not what role-playing games are about.
That's not. So are we saying that the null hypothesis is correct, that there is no connection between role-playing and D&D and Moorcock, or is there something still within Moorcock that feeds into the D&D game and actually gives it makes it fertile, it makes it something more than just a story-making game? It's
the colour and the trappings. I think it's the colour and the trappings of Moorcock books that translate well to role-playing games. The themes and the actual fates of the protagonists and the path of the protagonist maybe less so. But I can understand why people really enjoy the Stormbringer role-playing game, for example, because they love the idea of the world of the Young Kingdoms, and it appeals to them to play a merchant from the Isle of the Purple Towns hanging around with a Filcarian farmer and an Nadsokorian beggar, Yeah, Phil carrying. Yeah,
Was it pikeman or was that Picarade? Was
Pickeradian pikeman? Yeah,
that's the one.
mix and match. So I can understand why people want to do that, but that's not the essence of what Moorcock fantasy is. But I can understand why it's appealing to a degree. I can also understand why, as D&D, for example, has become more and more homogenised, that kind of stuff, that kind of detail from Moorcock has got more and more lost because games have developed in a way where they haven't kind of continued down a track to make things more Moorcockian. I think people are just, if you want to do something that's generally Moorcock related, that's okay. But unless you are one player, one GM, with a series of NPCs who come to help you out when you're in a sticky situation, that's the only way you can recreate a Moorcock fantasy game.
That's true of a lot of role-playing games that try to emulate swords and sorcery fiction, right? So I bought a game called Barbarians of Lemuria.
Love Barbarians of Lemuria, yeah.
Yeah, right? So there's a lot of things you can do with that game that emulate that feel of the heroes, and you have the minions that can be sort of knocked down, and then the bosses, the villains are actually quite almost as strong or stronger than the heroes sometimes, and you can do things like spend points so that they miraculously escape, or you can change you can miraculously find something that you need, or you can use hero points, whatever it is. But one thing that they pointed out in the rules is that in a true swords and sorcery genre piece, you don't have the group of heroes working together necessarily. Usually there's one core, there's one individual and a few like sidekicks. So in the case of Elric, you've got Moonglam or one of several other people who don't last quite as long as Moonglam, right?
Yeah.
So it's a problem with role-playing games and fiction and how they don't quite mesh, or at least swords and sorcery fiction.
Maybe the real problem is that if you want to do a properly Moorcockian role-playing game, you need a bunch of characters, but one of them needs to be the hero and everybody else needs to be the ones who hope to be alive at the end of the adventure.
Well, we can write it.
Maybe that's the way to do it. Maybe that's... is it the original faster Star Trek game, and it may be true of the more modern Star Trek game, the more diffuse role-playing game as well. Someone's got to be the captain, haven't they? You create your bridge crew, but one of them's got to be the captain. So maybe the approach needs to be, and we'll bear this in mind because, of course, the thing I said to my Stormbringer players is that the idea is we run Stormbringer 3rd edition as written, so we've randomly rolled everything, which is why the characters are all useless. We don't have a pikeman. We have 3 sailors, a warrior, and a beggar.
So you don't have a sorcerer even?
No. So I'm trying my best to make it epic and heroic. Actually, I'm not trying that hard, as they will attest. But maybe the approach needs to be that you have one overwhelmingly powerful or predestined to greatness or doom character, and everybody else kind of revolves around them. And actually, maybe that's the approach we should take when I run the second part, which the idea behind is, and it may well be the case that on this show we have the round table with the players where we talk about how crap or otherwise my Stormbringer game was, that for the next part we actually set something like that up, because those are the things we're going to consider. What do we want out of a Moorcockian game that will tick all of our Moorcock nerd boxes? So, yeah, maybe that's something to consider.
Well, you've got the core hero, but you've got to have some kind of group, like point system, right? Some kind of pool. So whether it's hope, it wouldn't be hope, right, for Moorcock, but something that lives on when your character inevitably dies because he's just a supporting cast member.
I think for the supporting cast members it can be hope points, but for the core hero it can be doom points, which can somehow cancel out or counteract hope points. There's some kind of mechanic desperate to be put together to do all of this. But yeah, that's going to be probably at the forefront of my mind now. If we're going to do something hardcore Moorcockian game-wise, we need one hero and a bunch of people around him, most of whom will probably die horribly. But maybe that's the entertaining part of it.
It's not looking too good, is it, for the D&D and Moorcock sort of fit, is it? But to me, like D&D, if you look back at it, with Blackmore, and David Arneson's sort of roots with his Blackmore campaign that became Dungeons and Dragons, you've got a group of useless men at arms and stuff who they're not even level 1, right? They're so the first level, if you get to first level, you're a veteran. That's why it's called a veteran in the old game, right?
Right.
So you go into the dungeon, and most of them would have died, and maybe one. I think the first adventure, one person got out of the castle's dungeon, and was made a veteran, right? Level 1. And so that idea of having a party, a group of people cooperating to achieve some kind of goal, is at the core of most role-playing games. But it's not really, unless you're doing a solo book or a solo game, it doesn't lend itself to what Michael Moorcock was doing with his heroes. Well, how about Tolkien though?
Well, I think
Fellowship.
Yeah,
is it closer to the Fellowship feel, you think?
With I suppose the main difference with Tolkien is that you've got multiple competent characters in the
you do have some, but you have a lot of incompetence as well, right?
Yeah, so you've got, and I think it fits better for a traditional RPG party, even though it is quite large because there's 9 of them. You've got the powerful wizard.
You haven't seen my party. I've got I had 9 players in my party on Wednesday.
Right, well, that's very old school. Isn't it? That's very old school.
No, that's online.
So let's say that is a contemporary role-playing game party then. Is that in D&D 5e? Yeah, in D&D 5e they would all be completely balanced and they would all be powerful to some degree.
Yeah.
So I mean, what have you got in the Fellowship? You've got 4 hobbits, all of whom are useless, pretty much. Yeah. At any given
Although
point.
They're the core members. They're the core members.
They're the core members, but they can sneak, and and if they're not acting like fucking buffoons, they do have certain capabilities which could come in handy if they were buffoons.
And they can pass themselves off as orcs, which is one of the things that actually keeps them alive.
True.
And again, why do hobbits look like orcs? This is a really interesting, but
I think
let's not touch on the orc question.
Yeah, I think it's probably because they wore an ostentatious hat or something.
I think it's the size, or who knows?
Yeah.
Who knows? It's a curious thing, though, isn't it?
Yeah, but you've got the elf with the bow. So you've got Aragorn's always the ranger, but Aragorn isn't. Aragorn's just hard and he can do a bit of tracking, and he's good with a sword. But you've got the elf with the bow. You've got the dwarf. You've got the wizard. You've got Boromir, who's another warrior. So actually, the more you think about the Fellowship, you might think actually that's, despite the fact you've got an overpreponderance of halfling rogues, that's actually quite comparable with a D&D party. That kind of works. Yeah. So I can understand why, in many ways, the whole structure of the Fellowship works well for being like sort of the source material for a D&D game. It doesn't really work in practice because the Fellowship only stay together for about 37 seconds before they all split up like a typical party and get into their own adventures, which would be a nightmare for a games master. So that works to a degree, and I think Tolkien is still massively, obviously evident in D&D of any edition, and I think Tolkien always will, because by dint of the fact that it's Tolkien and it's the Lord of the Rings and it's the Hobbit and the movies are so popular now, I think that will always be. And I'm not going to get upset or annoyed about it because I like Tolkien as much as the next man. I don't kind of subscribe to the Moorcock versus Tolkien thing. I think you can quite happily like them both.
I think it's a happy sort of law and chaos sort of continuum, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, and I can understand some of Moorcock's criticisms of Tolkien and some of the other criticisms of Tolkien, but it's a product of its time. It's still unbelievably rich and fertile ground for fantasy writers and fantasy gamers. So I'm all for a bit of Tolkien, and as it happens, Tolkien probably still is 60 to 70% of the DNA of D&D.
Right. So
unless you start digging into things like the Fiend Folio, I mean, one of the things I love about D&D, the fact that the still to this day persevere, is things like black puddings and gelatinous cubes, which are pure D&D, aren't they? The great thing about those is they are part of D&D's own identity. So D&D does have its own identity in certain ways, which I am quite happy about.
I do. Yeah, it's got its own feel. Its elves definitely aren't Tolkien's elves. There's something a bit odd about them. They're a bit sort of, especially in the older editions as well. They're pretty, they're pretty naff, right? A lot of these the demi-human races were quite weak. They were good at first level, but they had the level caps.
They did, of course, in basic D&D, didn't they? It's like, you can play one if you want, but you're going to be rubbish in 6 weeks' time.
if you ever get to that level.
Yeah.
So Moorcock, all right. So he's writing about one character who is, I don't know, is Elric or any of these people? Are they an everyman, or do they?
Well, this is the other
Do
peculiar
they
thing.
symbolize humanity or some?
This is the other
spirit
peculiar
of
thing about
humanity?
Moorcock's criticisms of things like Tolkien, isn't it? Is actually, when you look at Moorcock's protagonists, for the most part, they're always inherently powerful, noble, people of power and influence who just happen to, I mean, Elric is a noble of power or influence who just thinks that the rest of the Melniboneans are a set of decadent wankers, but he himself is just a goth emo teen.
Rebelling against.
Yeah. I mean,
what is really his identity, right? It's is his what. Yeah. He's as much a Melnibonian as any of the others. He's as decadent as the rest of them, really. But he
just wants to indulge it in different ways.
Yeah. It's very curious, isn't it? And reading it again after all these years, it's there's certain things that you notice that you would never have noticed back then. So you got this one guy, right? And it's obviously doesn't fit. But you do have the law and chaos, which I don't think Moorcock didn't come up with that originally, did he? I mean, he developed it quite a lot.
He developed
the multiverse, which is another D&D kind of like trope, isn't it? But
and he did kind of coin and popularize the multiverse even as an expression. I think he was the first person to actually use the expression multiverse in the Black Corridor in about 1962 or 3. Or was it the Sundered Worlds? It was one of those.
All right, so we've established that swords and sorcery isn't necessarily a good fit with D&D because D&D is its own thing. We've only talked about D&D. We haven't actually talked. Well, you've mentioned Stormbringer, but we haven't talked about like Warhammer, which is quite closely linked in a lot of ways to both D&D and Michael Moorcock, particularly with the use of chaos. That became a problem later on, but chaos and law I talked about right at the beginning, right? And the original idea of alignment, the meaning of alignment, which is something I try and remind people about on Twitter when they talk about how ridiculous a concept it is that it's what side you're aligned with. It's just a very simple concept. So in the original form, you have chaos, law, and neutrality, but it became something much more complicated than that later on.
So as a GM, how much emphasis do you place on characters playing to alignment?
It depends which system I'm using. Is that a cop-out? So I prefer to use the systems that use something like law, neutrality, chaos at the moment because it's not simple. It's really difficult to define what is good and evil when a lot of your actions anyway are going to involve acts that are quite, at best, morally dubious. A lot of things that adventurers get involved with. The whole idea of an adventure, taking these risks and doing these things, taking people's lives is at best morally dubious, but at worst, there's a lot of evil that you could ascribe to those actions. But by running away from that, by escaping from that, and seeing as alignment as which side you're on in some kind of cosmic conflict, and probably a lot of players will just fall on the side of neutrality because they don't have any or haven't realized they have a stake in it unless they're pushed due to some kind of. So the typical world in a D&D would the chaos would be the problem, right? Or in Warhammer, chaos would be the side that is warping reality to such an extent that you can't be neutral anymore. Perhaps you have to either side with law or completely switch to law in order to right the balance, which is great for driving a game. The concept, it's great for driving a book, and it's also great for driving a game because then I don't think it's as simple as we've dehumanized them by using alignment. I think if in the story's world, if law, turning it around, if law is somehow creating a world of death and stillness where there is no change, I think all of us could agree that's pretty evil, right? An evil world. And so responding to that and trying to keep your freedom, keep the world as a living system that isn't frozen would be morally correct.
I think you've just come up with the second key consideration for that essential elements for a Moorcockian game. Okay, so first of all, we've got to have the key protagonist, and the group of people who surround him to help enable his destiny. The second thing is, the players or the characters have got to have some skin in the game. So alignment can't just be a standalone thing. And I'm not suggesting that you would use necessarily alignment as, you know, the D&D take on it in a Moorcockian game. But you've got to have those forces at play, and you've got to have characters who have some meaningful stake in proceedings as to whether, you know, that they support this key protagonist, for want of a better expression, in their journey from where they are now to their ultimate destiny, which is either to overthrow the forces of chaos, or overthrow the stagnation of law, or the straight arrow, or the forces of the singularity, or however it may be, or maybe just to maintain the balance. And I think most of the Moorcock-driven Chaosium games were all about you know, it's all about the balance. So you had, I think, in one variation of the game, you even had law points, chaos points, and balance points, which were allocated depending upon what kind of activity was undertaken. But I think that mechanically that was more driven by, if you do something evil, you get a chaos point, whereas if you do something good, you get a law point. Whereas actually, it should be about driving towards some kind of culmination of some kind of overriding plot or direction for the narrative.
And I think that's where AD&D falls apart, or modern 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons, because you have the 9-point alignment system, and it's pulling in all these different directions. So it's not really pulling in any direction half the time. Or, you know, are we all fighting chaotic evil? So
yeah,
and so it's difficult to police alignment. And do you want to police it anyway? So it's easier to sort of what a lot of people do now is just throw alignment out of the window, which is I think that's a shame, because it also gets rid of something that's really essential to D&D as well. I think the alignment, just like hit points or armor class or class, fixed classes like archetypes or race, whatever you want to call race now. You know, we can change the names. I'm open to change, call in, but these sort of archetypes, these characters, they're exciting, and they give D&D a flavor that is kind of like a fictional world, a fantasy world of its own, right? But the original alignment system, that 3-point alignment system, it's an interesting idea, and you can change the names, obviously. So you could have good and evil, you could do what you want, right? It doesn't really matter. And it may perhaps the Tolkien, we're looking at good and evil. And recently, from my readings, I've been doing a load of reading of Tolkien recently, and it occurs to me that very few of his characters are actually good, especially in the older work, the Silmarillion and the later works. A lot of them are very troubled, difficult characters. This idea of black versus white, Tolkien writes about good versus evil. That's not actually what he's doing there at all. I think his concept of evil is where nobody has choice. Orcs don't have a choice. They have no. They have been ups. They are slaves of the Dark Lord. There's a point at the end of the story where they kill Sauron, and the orcs are thrown into confusion because they're no longer under the Dark Lord's domination. Yeah. They're suddenly free. They don't know what to do. Yeah. And obviously he calls his peoples the free peoples. So there's this sense of freedom being good, the freedom to choose. And there's no priesthood, right? There's no real kind of gods or priesthood there telling you what's good or bad. But the important thing is that there's some kind of free will at play, and then there's the more you stop taking responsibility for yourself, and you fall under the domination of others, that's evil. That's how I've recently started to interpret Tolkien, and I don't think that's me reading my own desires into his work. I think that's really, really core.
I think you're absolutely right. The Silmarillion is basically a catalogue of conflict.
It is, and screw-ups, messes. Yeah, and even Galadriel does some terrible things in the original version.
Personal agendas causing terrible consequences. Yeah, and that's why I really like the Silmarillion. But I think one of the reasons he hit on an absolutely almost unassailable immunity in terms of being the fantasy classic is over all of his redevelopment again and again and again and again of the story, and whether this was accidental or deliberate or whatever, or just the result of a lot of development, was he hit on a couple of things which became absolutely key tenets of genre fiction, but not just genre fiction, all adventure fiction, was the big bad and the MacGuffin. And he established the big bad and the MacGuffin, which basically drive, 800 pages of adventure until ultimately it all gets solved and a Deus Ex Machina, the Eagles, rescues the heroes. So he kind of hit on that, and just about everybody who's kind of produced fantasy fiction ever since then, of a more kind of generalised nature, has kind of gone in that direction. And that's why fantasy fiction has moved towards things like multi-part epics and everything else, and kind of moved away from, I think, what things like Fritz Leiber and Moorcock and Robert E. Howard and other people were doing. Was really all of their fiction was often consisted just of short vignettes.
Yeah, self-contained stories.
Yeah,
right? About individuals.
Yeah, absolutely. Because if you read the Coram novels, he's really a passenger passing through a series of psychedelic vignettes, but he's kind of, it's how he responds to everything, and it's his response to, I think Ralph described it as Coram kind of is faced by a succession of chaotic forces, and all he does is admonish them. He goes through a series of psychedelic experiences, gets face to face with them, admonishes them, and then his powerful artifacts do what they're going to do anyway. He's just the wielder of them, and that's what makes it more interesting, I think, from that perspective. It just makes it a little bit different. Whereas in Tolkien, it appears that everybody has a great deal of agency, and it appears that everybody has a great deal of impact upon how things pan out. But ultimately, they're still all revolving around this central MacGuffin, and that's what gives this feel of epicness, and also throw in a few good battles. Can't go wrong.
There's a lot of padding there with the battles.
Yeah.
So do you think that both Tolkien? I don't think anybody's talked as much about Tolkien on your on a Moorcock podcast ever before.
It was bound to happen eventually, and now's as good a time as any, because we're talking about fantasy and role-playing games, aren't we?
I don't see a conflict here, but I wonder if both of them are looking at problems of their time. So you've got Tolkien, who is growing up at the beginnings of modernity, and he uses modernity. People often see him as being anti-modern, but he often uses modernity in his art styles and his prose styles. So it's not as simple as one might think, right? But what he's faced with two large conflicts in his written career: the First World War, the Second World War, and the impact that had on his life. He wrote something about all his friends none of his friends surviving. I think all of his friends died, and they were just young people. And I think that must have really stuck with him for the rest of his life. I'm certain of it. And the fact that he was injured and taken out of combat, and his unit was pretty much decimated, I think. And of course, then his son was sent off to war to fight against the Nazis, and he was an anti-communist, of course, right? So in his worldview, he sees different forms of modernity, coalescing into authoritarian. Of course, the guy's a conservative royalist and a Catholic, but to him, those things are natural, the natural order, I guess. And he sees these other new monsters of communism and National Socialism, fascism, suddenly coming here and taking away, changing the world in a way that isn't like, this sort of nice little sort of English country garden view that he wished he could have continued living in, because England has been changed forever, Whereas Moorcock, Moorcock, just quickly, Moorcock, he is like writing at different times in the 60s and 70s, and he's seeing these very complicated conflicts where it's impossible to tell who's on the right side, the wrong side. We've got the Korean War when he was probably growing up. I knew he would have experienced. I think he experienced the Second World War, didn't he? The Blitz and stuff. So I think he talked about it previously.
He grew up in the rubble of London.
So and Vietnam, and the protests against Vietnam were happening at that time, and so his view of chaos and law perhaps is sort of like informed by the world as he saw it. So both of them are writing about these conflicts around them and using fantasy as a means to make sense of it. Perhaps.
Yeah. I think it's there's been that autobiography film about Tolkien recently, which
I've not watched it.
Yeah, I've not seen either. It got quite a lot of criticism, but I think it's now quite widely accepted that Tolkien's view of the world, certainly as a young man, was formed, and his view of technology was formed by mechanized combat and the effect it had on his generation, which is absolutely fair, and nobody can argue with that. I think where it gets particularly interesting for me, and this is the beauty of fiction, and this is the beauty of reading, and this is the beauty of individuality and how people respond to the things around them, their own experiences, and what they identify within fiction. I suppose I always draw this podcast at some point back to my granddad Pops, who gave me all these books in the first place in the early 80s. Now, Tolkien wrote The Lord of the Rings and was massively informed, not just by all of the Norse mythology and everything else, but also and folklore, but also particularly by his experiences of mechanized combat and the deaths of his friends and everything else. So you would expect somebody who experienced something very, very similar, who went to war in a massively mechanized war, who lost lots of his friends, and who by the 1960s, in Pops's case, he had a photograph on his organ in his living room, their best living room, which we never used to go and sit in. But it was a photograph of him and 15 or 16 other guys who were part of his company or section or whatever it was, his immediate comrades. And they were all dead by the 90s.
Was he in the army?
Yes, he was, yeah. They were all dead by the 60s. They didn't all die in the war, but the last one to die died in the early 60s in a car crash. So from the early 60s onwards, everybody in that picture apart from him was dead. And by the 80s, he's giving me all of these books. So I could completely understand if Pops had have super identified with Tolkien because of Pops didn't do Tolkien at all. Pops did Moorcock, Fritz Leiber, Sven Hassel. That's what Pops did. So Pops had this experience of mechanized warfare. But this is why everything is so beautifully individual, and this is why reading tickles different people's fancies. So Pops was much more inclined to identify with something like Moorcock, where the characters have no agency and they're carried along, but Moorcock does some kind of exploration of the human condition in some way, and some kind of investigation into why people end up being forces of fate or destiny or chaos and doing fucking awful things. And that was his bag. I mean, my other granddad barely read at all, so I can't really compare to how he was with my other granddad. But this is how great fiction is, and this is how great fantasy fiction is. I love them both. I never had the experiences Pops had. I never had the experiences Moorcock had growing up in the Blitz and in the rubble of London, and I certainly never had the experiences that Tolkien had. But the fact that we can kind of discuss them, identify with them to some degree, and actually vicariously experience how these things made them feel and how they thought about these things like war and death and destruction is one of the beauties of this kind of fiction, and one of the reasons I love it so much. And you know what, that's probably a good place to park this conversation. Now, I would very much love sometime further down the line for us to get back together again and have a similar conversation about our experiences of gaming and reading and what we're reading at some point in the future, because I've really enjoyed it. I've enjoyed my black lagers, and I've enjoyed finally having a face-to-face conversation with you on the other side of the world.
Yeah, because we've had a few conversations to date, but nothing actually like this. So it's been great. Yeah, I've really enjoyed it. I hope I've not gone too far off the rails. There weren't any rails, though, were there?
There are no rails on this show.
There's only the Moonbeam Roads.
We have a couple of drinks and we set off down the Moonbeam Roads and see where they lead us. So, well, you know what, Rob? It's been an absolute pleasure talking to you, and
nice
we have to do it again.
Cheers. Thanks so much.
Okay, so I've got some more guests in Derry and Tom's. Rob has just gone down the lift, and who pops out of the lift? But tapping my bottle with my ring, so I've already fucked up my my recording discipline. Take my ring off. There we go. So who pops out the lift? But Neil, Graham, and Norman. 3 of our fantastic Breakfast in the Ruins patron, and we're here to just have a quick chinwag about our experience playing Stormbringer. Good evening, Neil. Good evening, Graham. Good evening, Norman.
Evening.
Hello.
Nice to have you aboard. So, we decided a while back that we would have a bash at Stormbringer. After doing that episode and having opinions about Stormbringer 3rd Edition, the Games Workshop version, we decided to actually give it a bash and play it as written. So we randomly rolled everything. Hoping that the Gonzo gods would look down on us and would get a Melnibonian sorcerer and would get a Darajorian, I don't know, whatever. Anyway, we didn't get a Filcarian farmer, which is a bonus. We didn't get any peasants. But what did we get? We got 1 warrior, 3 sailors, and a beggar with leprosy, which, I think, you know, to some degree is very a la mode for Stormbringer. But of course, Neil, you got the beggar. So this whole random character generation thing, how did that live up to your expectations?
Oh, I've played Stormbringer many times before in the past, and the gods the gods of chaos have always smiled upon me, and the lords of law have always abandoned me. I once got to be from Pantang. That was my moment of glory, but then obviously I failed to be a sorcerer.
Yeah.
It's a hilarious character creation system. It really is, and I was kind of hoping for something really crap, and it delivered, didn't it? You know,
It really did.
Rubbing snails on myself and
Yeah.
you know, grubbing around in the desert. There's nothing like leprosy to back you up.
Yeah, that's less to do with the system and more to do with my terrible GMing. But you ended up with a leper, and then of course there's this random generation element where you get your core skills, all of which are crap because you're a beggar with leprosy, and then you get the opportunity to roll some new skills, but of course it's random rolls, and you rolled appalling for all of those additional skills, so you genuinely ended up with an absolutely useless, incredibly incompetent beggar who couldn't even climb a ladder properly because his fingers were knackered from leprosy. Nevertheless,
my favourite one was I had first aid at 2%. So if ever I wanted to actually first aid people, they would back away in fear. My likelihood of additional injury was far. I want to hook you with this stick and see if you feel better. You know, no.
yeah.
Not the leprosy stick.
So that kind of, to some degree, your character lived up to expectations. So Graham, you ended up with, I believe, were you the warrior or the sailor? You're the warrior, aren't you?
Yes, right. I'm a warrior. I'm not.
You were the party's one warrior.
Either.
So how did it meet your expectations of playing a high heroic Moorcockian role playing game?
Well, the last time I played Stormbringer, I think it was the 4th edition, and it must have been about 30 years ago.
Yeah.
So I had this sort of this memory, this sort of golden, wonderful memory of being a teenager playing. This warrior was just useless, totally useless, which is, you know, it's a challenge to play when you're so bad.
Yeah. I mean, we'll get into why the system doesn't really support heroic escapades shortly. We'll talk about that a little bit more. We'll talk about the basic role-playing percentile kind of deal. But in terms of rolling up a warrior, once again, you were a Picaridian farmer. You actually rolled a warrior. But of course, statistics were particularly average, and we tested that warrior in combat, and it wasn't massively heroically successful, was it?
It was pretty bad. I think that the first encounter, so it's just a complete embarrassment all round. It's hard to feel sort of heroic when you can't even beat up sort of a standard peasant type person.
Yeah. And of course, Norman, you were one of our 3 sailors. So once again, random generation, and out of 5 characters, we ended up with 3 sailors.
I think I did have the distinction of being the most rubbish one, though, because most sailors have absolutely no dexterity, which was a bit of a drawback. But the thing I've always liked about like random rolling like this is it gives you something to hang your hat on, and it makes sure it veers you away from sort of power gaming and like metagaming, which is
Stormbringer certainly does that.
Yeah, I really hate the trend towards metagaming where you have people who sit there with the latest rules and they've worked out the character progression and what spell or whatever is going to give them the highest DPS.
Yeah,
I'd never even heard of metagaming until I was in a raiding guild in World of Warcraft, and that's where I first had exposure to it.
Yeah,
and to find people then back porting that into role-playing games came as a bit of a shock to me, because to me it was always right, you're going to end up with some crap characteristics, and that's part of your character, and that's what you're going to build from.
Yeah,
and in a way it's almost I guess it almost does not so much the high fantasy fiction, but maybe more the sort of grim dark stuff where you tend to have people that are rubbish to begin with, and they build upon that. And I think in a way this sort of approach encourages that you are rubbish to start with.
I mean, I must say, I think I've said this before, I've always favoured games where the character, I like low power gaming. I like gaming where I remember many years ago I ran a game of Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay, and all the players had never played it before, but they were all Warhammer Battle players, and they were all Warhammer 40,000 players, and they'd played D&D, and they'd got to high level characters. And I ran this game where there were, one of them was God, what is it in Warhammer? A charcoal burner. one of them was a charcoal burner. One of them was like a temple acolyte who was like 16 or something. And the other one, I don't know, was probably a farmer, or something really stupid like that. They were absolutely terrible. They were useless at everything. But it was super entertaining because they had to go on. This is the kind of crap games I run. One of the things that they had to do was the head of the temple asked them to to go to another village to get a load of sausages for the religious festival. And on the way back, they got confronted by bandits, and they ended up just negotiating with the bandits and using kind of a discussion about politics and the plight of the poor, and ended up bartering away half of the sausages in order to avoid getting into a fight and coming back with half the sausages. And that was like a 5-hour game. So that gives you a good idea. This probably explains to you how disappointing my game has been. And if you had any high expectations of high heroism, you were in for a sharp shock. But yeah, I really enjoy kind of low-powered gaming, but obviously, something like Stormbringer, something like a Michael Moorcock game, you want something perhaps a little bit more impressive. But it's interesting you make the point about metagaming. And you're, Graham, Neil, you're kind of gamers who go all the way back to the 80s as well and playing D&D and things like that. But metagaming is very D&D, isn't it? It's like you get the player's handbook, you roll your stock characteristics, but as editions moved on, that became a little bit more forgiving and less punishing, and then you can go through the player's handbook, you can go through the rule book and identify the best paths to power, and that's a really fucking boring way to game for me. I don't know what you think.
I like the idea of having these worlds that you go into and then just being a normal person, that you're trying to sort of navigate that world and just try to live in this fantasy world. And you've got the expectations because you've read the books, and obviously the books are about heroes and things like that, but when you're just a normal person and you've got to deal with all the stuff around you, I enjoy that. I think it's the challenge, isn't it? Yeah,
absolutely. And if you get into a strange encounter where you have to what was it? You had to do you had to gamble with a scorpion.
Yeah.
Yeah. Or
Yeah.
perhaps you have to come up with an interesting way of sorting out the sores and calluses on a beggar's fingers. You got to get creative, haven't you?
Yeah,
And if
snail
half an hour
juice.
of the game revolves around mashing up some snails to make snail juice to treat a leper's sores, well, you know what? That's high fantasy, as far as I'm concerned.
I think that's sort of all of the games that I remember from from playing in the 80s. They were all, you were normal. You think back to like Traveller, character generation in Traveller, to me is always the burning example of that, where you'd spend hours rolling up your character and working their way through their service, usually in the bureaucracy or something, and good chance of ending up dead.
Yeah.
And I think, looking back, the only game that I ever played where you started out better than the people you were meeting was Twilight 2000.
Yeah.
Because you started off with loads of money, so you bought yourself all the equipment.
Yeah.
And I remember playing a campaign of that where, we were loaded to the gills, we drive around in a flash vehicle with all these guns and stuff. And then it was quite good because as the ammunition started running out and there was no way to go and buy more, and suddenly it was sort of the reverse. It was almost a sort of Call of Cthulhu-esque degrade. You watch your sanity dropping, and you're thinking, oh, my character's getting worse and worse. In Twilight 2000, it was, oh no, we've run out of that type of ammunition.
Yeah.
We're in trouble now, and you end up with clubs and stuff.
Yeah.
But I think, I don't know, just my memory of the 80s was it was just mediocre. You played mediocre characters. Celebration of mediocrity. Maybe that was the 80s for you.
Yeah. Neil.
I remember the first game of Dungeons and Dragons I played. One of my players named his character Conan, and then partway through the game, when it clearly wasn't able to do Conan-y type things, he turned to me and he complained and he said, oh, Conan wouldn't take this much damage from a simple sword blow. And it's like, you can call your character Elric. You can call him, it doesn't make you Elric. The rules don't allow you to, he sort of thought that if he'd just gone in with that gung-ho attitude, he would have been able to. But we found very early on, Tunnels and Trolls was the best system to recreate that kind of heroic, because it was so much more flexible than everything else. And it's quite surprising that Ken St. Andrew, who designed Tunnels and Trolls, is the same guy who designed the original Stormbringer, because I think his original rule set is far more Moorcockian than his Moorcock rule set. It's quite strange. You can bash out some serious heroic characters in that and have a whacking great time. You can have sorcerer, sword slinging people, whereas Dungeons and Dragons rules always, if you want to go the way of magic, my son, you cannot.
I wonder if maybe his approach to the rule set was a bit like Moorcock's approach to writing. That it was like, oh, right, I've got to turn out this Michael Moorcock role-playing game. I'm going to sit on the toilet high on drugs for a weekend, drinking a bottle of whiskey and knock out an RPG system.
Yeah, you know what? I could buy that. I really could buy it.
Yes.
Because, I do find it an entertaining read, but it's a fairly slight read, is that book. And once you strip out the BRP stuff and the little bits that are related to RuneQuest, there's not a whole lot left.
No. I would agree with that entirely.
Moorcock's spoken a lot about RPGs, hasn't he? About the fact that he's not had much real contact with it. He's never been a role player. I mean, compare him to like George R.R. Martin, who, from my understanding, most of his books come from role-playing game sessions.
Yes, Wildcards is completely from his home-generated superhero game, isn't it? I know they did a GURPS thing, but it came from his own game that they'd created with other writers. And that's a seriously good set of books, much better, I think, than Game of Ice and Fire. Game of Ice and Fire?
Song of Ice and Fire. Yeah. He's a hardcore gamer, George R.R. Martin, isn't he? Sadly, I think you can certainly when it comes to influences and things like that, you can tell that he was heavily influenced by Moorcock. It's just a shame some of Moorcock's more personable qualities didn't rub off on him, because I don't know if you saw that recent nonsense about the awards thing for the science fiction and fantasy guild that he's part of. If you've not seen it, look into it. He came across as a real tool. But anyway, we won't get into that. But it's interesting. You should mention, like, you've got this thing where somebody comes along to play a game and they call their character Conan, and they have an expectation that if you play in a fantasy game, they have an expectation that they want to play someone wildly heroic and everything else. And I can understand that people might have that expectation. I can understand that people want to do it and they want to play that. But this ain't the game. If that's what you want to do, this is not the game to do that with. And when you actually think about the characters that game created for us, in the rule book, you've got these statistics, haven't you, for characters, and you've got statistics for Elric and other people and other key people within the mythos and within the books of Moorcock. And frankly, it all gets a little bit silly. So, you've got so what were your weapon skills in the region of? They were in the 40s and 50s, weren't they? I know that Meek the beggar had I think, what is it, 10% or something?
10% in pointy stick.
Yeah, so for listeners who are not particularly familiar with role-playing games, the basic role-playing system assigns a percentage value to a skill. And you have to roll under that on a set of dice that will result in a result from 1 to 100. So Meek had a skill of 10%, which means that 1 time in 10, he would maybe hit something. So that would make for a very, very, very long fight. And of course, even if you got 40 or 50%, and this is what we found when we were having the fights in the last installment, was that even if you've got 50% skill and you hit 50% of the time, your opponent has probably got 50% parry or 50% dodge, which reduces your average ability to hit something to 1 in 4. Norman?
I think what it does is it changes your approach to combat.
Yeah.
Is it stops it being, I'm going to Conan leap in with my mighty thews exposed, slashing away, and it starts being okay, I'm going to play dead until this thing has gone over me, and then I'm going to attempt to stab it, knowing that I'm probably going to miss.
Yeah.
Even if I don't miss, it's probably not going to do very much.
Yeah. And in fact, that very dramatic situation did occur, didn't it? In our game. So you've got this, and it's absolutely fine if in a dramatic scene, not necessarily in a role-playing game, in a dramatic scene, or even if you think about a fight in some kind of fiction or something like that, it's absolutely fine if there's manoeuvring and shifting back and forth and looking for openings and all that business. But actually role-playing that by rolling dice is really fucking boring. And it gets to a point where you can no longer make it interesting, where a fight has gone on for something like 20 minutes and it's not even a massively powerful creature, but everybody just keeps rolling to miss and it keeps parrying. It's not actually good fun, is it? Or is it? I don't know. I'm the GM and I'm thinking, I'm laughing all the way through and having a great time. It's not a particularly rewarding way of gaming. Graham? Yeah, Graham.
I quite enjoyed it in the sense that I enjoyed it. So just it just becomes absurd, ridiculous. It's actually quite good in the sense, that you're desperate to be a hero, but you're just not. It just feels quite real.
Yeah. Well, there is that. I don't know. Maybe I'm overthinking it. Maybe I'm worrying too much about your experience as players, and actually it's all fine.
Yeah, it's an odd one because I don't play that much, so I don't mind spending quite a while on a fight.
Yeah.
maybe that's the difference. You know, I haven't played that frequently or regularly for like 20 years or something, and yeah, it's still quite new to me, and I'm still enjoying that sort of lots of roles and missing each other and stuff.
Yeah.
But I suspect if I'd been playing solidly for the last 20 years, I would be one of these people who are like, this is just rubbish.
Yeah.
I want combat to be resolved with the roll of one die, preferably not even that, with some sort of narrative investment by the players working for GM and stuff. So yeah, I can see how they're different people will have different expectations from combat.
Yeah. Yeah.
Over the weekend, I've been playing King of Dungeons by Stevens's fantastic little short book. One of the cracking ideas in that is the escalation dice, which goes on the table on the second round of combat and increases, obviously, up to a value of 6. So what it means is the heroes kind of get more and more powerful with each round. So you sort of, you sort of feel like the fight's going to and fro, and then you basically, it ends pretty quickly, and then you can get on with the game again. So if you like that, you like clearing out the room, it works fantastically.
Well, that's a really interesting
Great idea.
mechanic, isn't it? And a good idea. A good idea if you kind of if you want to escalate things and kind of get on with things. But I've just very quickly looked at the statistics for Elric in the Stormbringer role-playing game, and Elric, when he's using Stormbringer, has 112% to hit and 98% to parry. So you know, it's like, okay, if that player who comes in wants to play the hero, in order to make it work, this system has to give the big hero or the big bad those ridiculously overblown stats. So it doesn't really work for me. I kind of like the system because I've always been attached to basic role-playing systems. It's obviously used in Call of Cthulhu and RuneQuest, which I've never really played that much. Certainly never played any of the Glorantha stuff. So yeah, I don't think it's particularly suited, but it's interesting you should mention like sort of a different system which allows you to progress things a lot quicker. Just spent the weekend playing Stormhack, Saturday and Sunday, with Ralph. And of course we discussed that on the last show. Or it might be the show before, by the time this comes out. And Ralph's taken a really interesting approach to using elements of Stormbringer, but the elements were perhaps in Stormbringer you rolled a powerful character. So all the characters have got some kind of patron who they have a relationship with, be it a Lord of Chaos or an Elemental Lord or anything else. All of the characters have some kind of demon-bound possession. So that kind of thing where previously, I think I'm on record as saying that I don't think it's particularly Moorcockian or particularly consistent with the Stormbringer world that everybody and the dog have demon-bound, packets of cigarettes or wallets or anything else. But actually, that is the deal with Stormhack, is the players are intrinsically powerful from the very off, and the characters actually have the ability to be powerful right from the very off, and it's baked into the system. And one of the things I really love about what he's done is taken some elements of Black Hack, so it's a roll under system. So of course D&D, it's you roll over a target number on a 20-sided dice, don't you? Whereas this is the opposite. It's roll under, but you roll as high as possible under your skill. So what it means is that if you could be a pickpocket with a knife, but if you attack something and your dexterity is, I don't know, 15 or whatever, and you're throwing a knife at it, if you roll 14, not only are you super successful, it's high, but within your skill. So it's successful, so it does that much damage as a base, then you add the dagger damage to it, which means that someone with an absolutely incredible level of skill with a knife will completely dispatch a warrior with a battle axe who's got a lower level of skill, because it's all about the skill. And this thing about, so Paul in the game last week, everybody's having this fight, everybody's swinging and missing, everybody makes a couple of connections, but Paul, because he had the appropriate statistics to be able to have a Lormirian sea axe, which does a ridiculous amount of damage, dispatches this thing in one blow. not because he's massively skilled, but because the equipment on the equipment list does 3d6 damage, and he happens to have one. So it's a completely different approach. It's intrinsically powerful characters, and also there's a really, really nice way of encouraging the players to use magic and think about how they exploit the power of their demon. And it was absolutely fascinating in play, and I really, really enjoyed it. And I think we're going to get on to very shortly talking about what we want from a Moorcockian style game, but it's definitely right up there with the things that I would consider, the systems that I would consider to play that kind of game. But it means that I've got to shift my assumptions about what I want a Moorcockian game to be, because I think what Stormhack does very well is deliver a Stormbringer RPG experience that's very, very satisfying, that heightens certain things from Moorcock novels and makes all of the players capable of having that power, not just the Emperor of Melniboné or a super powerful wizard, because everybody's got that capability. And that's what I've learned is that's what a lot of players want from their Stormbringer game. You know, so I've got to kind of alter my assumptions about what these games should be.
It'll be interesting to see if, because obviously something like the original Eternal Champion, Erico's book, where you're dealing with a character who can, spoilers here, wipe out the whole of humankind, obviously with Eldrin weapons, but those kind of skill levels, those kind of ability levels, I would be quite scared to give to some of my players.
Yeah.
But obviously, if that's the kind of thing that they would love to do, we did kind of homebrew our own Moorcock game in the 80s when some of my players really, really wanted that experience. And I've got to say, after about a month or two of play, everybody resembled the character from the Stone Thing. They all had like replaced hands, replaced arms, chaos gems embedded in various bits of their bodies.
Yeah.
We were not very under control back then, so I don't think anyone replaced their penis. I think that was the line that they drew in the sand.
Yeah.
With their sandstone penis, I think probably. But it did get quite kind of crazy. And if you look at some of the drawings, one of the characters I draw is still one of the characters from that game, and he has an octopus tentacle as one arm and a demon claw. Both eyes are replaced.
Yeah.
I think his foot is also. I mean, if you give some people the power, they will just power game, and it can be hilarious.
Yeah.
Sounds like something out of 40K.
Yeah, it does. It does. So, of course, that doesn't particularly help if you just want your characters to be able to to go to the pub, or just maybe join the local thieves guild or something like that, something a little bit more kind of RPG classic. But of course, this is all kind of thinking about the Young Kingdoms and Stormbringer and Elric, isn't it? And there have been other role playing games, although not many of them. The Hawkmoon. I mean, if we think Stormbringer was lightweight in terms of content, well, the Hawkmoon game from the 80s was even more lightweight. There's very, very little content in that, other than it's a very pretty box.
So the famous left in the back of a taxi.
That's right, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, but I always have my feeling about that. It's like, my dog ate it. My dog ate my homework, Chaosium, honestly.
And there's the Dragon Lords, isn't there, which I haven't played.
Yeah, and actually, Dragon Lords of Melniboné, I actually think it's quite a good read. And I didn't really do the D20 boom or D&D 3.5, so the system itself I've got no real opinion of, but I think there's some quite good, interesting things in there. And I think if you were to use, I don't know, maybe even use D&D 5th edition or something like that for a Moorcockian game, I think there's a lot of good ideas in Dragon Lords. But bottom line is, I think for a Moorcockian game, it shouldn't just be about the Young Kingdoms. There's so much more available in Moorcock's broad oeuvre, isn't there? That could be really, really interesting and really, really quite rewarding to get stuck into. So here's a question for you then, and we'll go one by one. So Norman, what are 3 things that you want in a Moorcockian role-playing game? And don't worry, because we can edit out long silences. And this is the This is the beauty of podcasting.
It's fairly obvious from where I'm going to come from on this one. I mean, probably my favourite thing of Moorcock is that whenever there's a party, there's a huge long list of guests, and there's usually Hawkwind involved. So that's my first thing.
Right. So number one, a game must include a party at Ladbroke Grove that goes on for 2 weeks.
Exactly.
I think that's fair. Okay, that's one.
I mean, this is it. I've read a lot of Moorcock. I enjoy all of his stuff. I enjoy the fantasy stuff. I find it's good, and I love the whole multiverse eternal champion idea. But the stuff that I really enjoy of his is the more, I guess, left field, the Cornelius stuff, the Colonel Pyatt stuff. That's what I enjoy. And if someone was to say, we're going to do a Moorcock role-playing session, I'd be thinking, right, it's going to be freeform. It's going to be quite weird. It's going to be, I mean, to me, games, different game systems. It's very much about the game setting. You know, I love what's been created around it, and I think with a Moorcock role-playing game, I'd like to be almost world building.
Yeah.
As part of it, you know, it being weird, it being okay. Well, and I guess something like Blades in the Dark could be quite useful for this, where you're retrofitting bits into it. It's like, okay, you know, this is happening, right? Well, I've got, you know, it's my cousin that I'm shagging or something.
Yeah.
Is going to turn up in some kind of, I don't know, flying device and smash through the wall and save the day.
Yeah.
But will then get, you know, buggered by an obese bishop or something.
Yeah.
But that's, you know, that's the kind of weirdness I kind of be looking for from it.
Yes. So number one, we need long, extravagant parties involving Hawkwind. Number two, it's got to be freeform, it's got to be psychedelic, and at some point it's got to involve Bishop Beasley getting buggered by Mitzi with a strap on whilst eating a Mars bar.
Exactly. The Mars bar is an important bit.
Yeah. Number three.
Yeah.
I thought that's quite a lot, to be fair.
Yeah, I think in terms of making demands, I'd feel bad if I attempted to come up with a third one.
Okay, no, that's cool. And actually,
you know,
I'm going to make a note of all this because, of course, what we did originally say was that after we'd done this, we'd have this conversation and then would play another game based upon all of our wants and desires for a Moorcockian role-playing game. Whether I run it or not, or whether somebody else in this virtual room runs it, remains to be seen. But, Graham, your top three things that you would expect or want in a Moorcockian role-playing game.
Yeah, so I think similar to Norman, really. So the things I really like about Moorcock are, well, the books I really enjoy are things like Behold the Man and The Black Corridor, where could you do an RPG based in The Black Corridor? I don't know, but it's the stuff around that, the sort of ideas around that. And then there's also, you know, things like in the Dances at the End of Time, which is just crazy. You know, that sort of immortals that can just do anything they like.
Yeah. And
that would be quite an interesting sort of setting for an RPG where you've got that complete freedom to do anything and just see how the people go with that and how they run with it. So I think that sort of freedom. But just the sort of absurdities in the sort of the Dances at the End of Time, I think would be good. So I think that absurdities.
Yeah, Norman, you wanted to come in there?
Yeah, I was going to say, the thing which struck me about the Dances at the End of Time is how it almost feels like it ties in with like the culture novels, the Ian Banks stuff, where you've got a society where energy has become so cheap that you can do pretty much anything you want. To live on a floating island around a double sun, you can have it.
Yeah.
And it felt to me, you know, I'd love to have an RPG in the culture universe, and it kind of feels that and the Dances at the End of Time they're really similar.
Yeah, I'm absolutely amazed nobody's done a culture RPG.
I think it'd be a hard one to pull off.
Yeah, I think you got a point there. It's so massive and so broad, and really anything's possible, isn't it? In the culture,
Yeah.
and in his series of novels, it's like I remember thinking about the Ringworld RPG, and when I finally got my hands on it, it was like, well, how do you even do the Ringworld RPG? Because the Larry Niven known space is so massive. Before the culture, the only thing that was like the culture was Larry Niven known space in terms of breadth and you know the amount of books that all tie into the same kind of consistent universe. But sorry, we've got kind of gone off on one there. Graham, what else?
Yeah, where was it? Yeah, so yeah, that sort of absurdity, that sort of freedom there. And yeah, you know, I really enjoy his fantasy works, but I think the stuff that really stuck with me when I was reading his stuff was the things that weren't necessarily the sort of traditional fantasy. But then, you know, the whole sort of what's his name, Bastable. Yeah, that would be brilliant because it just, you know, that's a lovely setting, a wonderful setting and a wonderful place to be. And I really enjoyed those books. That really was a place that I felt a lot more sort of, I'd like to be there rather than some of the sort of fantasy stuff, other fantasy stuff.
Yeah. Anything else? Or are you sticking at 2 like Norman?
Was that 2?
Yeah.
Kind of rambled there. Oh, and Hawkwind, of course.
Yeah. Okay. Everybody agrees on more Hawkwind. Neil, you're a seasoned GM. You run a game, of course, all weekend for Grogmeet, haven't you? But what about you? What do you want from a Moorcockian game? Either if you're running one, what would you want to do to deliver a Moorcockian experience to players, or what would you want from the ideal Moorcockian role playing experience?
I suppose that, I mean, the thing is I think we're all kind of saying that we'd quite like a Jerry Cornelius role playing game. And I think maybe it could be just our age and for a long time I went off Moorcock's fantasy stuff, and I really just championed his later stuff, you know. So really all I was reading was Cornelius and Pyatt, was Anti-Minjaws, Mother London, those kind of things. And so if it was a role-playing game that generated that kind of experience, it would all be about the weird characters, wouldn't it? You know, it would be creating a slice of London and filling it with amazing people. And I mean, in a sense, I think a little bit of shoehorning, you can pretty much get any fantasy game. I still stand by Tunnels and Trolls. You could get Tunnels and Trolls to create any of Moorcock's fantasy worlds with a bit of tweaking. You know, you could create the Young Kingdoms quite easily and have a whacking great time, and everybody have a magic sword. You know, and you'd never go into that kind of Tolkienian Scandinavian kind of fan fiction. It would be pure Moorcockania.
Yeah.
You know, I was waving around before, but obviously people on the thing won't see it, but I've got a Luther Arkwright book here, which is the expansion for the Mithras game, which was the kind of 6th edition.
Oh god, yeah. Originally it was RuneQuest 6. Then it was So this is how it went. It was Mongoose RuneQuest 2. Then it was rebranded as Legend. Then it was rebranded as RuneQuest 6 when Design Mechanism started up and they took it off Mongoose, and then it became Mithras. So, I mean, you know, I think we've mentioned before that with RuneQuest and a lot of these other games, if you did like a family tree, it'd be like one of those heavy metal family trees from the 1980s. Yes. Remember those?
Yeah.
And how baffling they were. Well, you could do that with RuneQuest. Yeah, so Mithras is essentially RuneQuest 2, Mongoose RuneQuest 2, stroke Legend, stroke RuneQuest 6, stroke Mithras. Yes. Actually, quite a good system. I quite like it, but it's still BRP at base, isn't it?
It is. You still have those nagging percentages to hit. But the Luther Arkwright book is incredibly good. You could run a Jerry Cornelius game with this. Certainly, you could run a final program game with this. It's also got all your Bastable stuff in. It's very steampunky. You could recreate Bastable without breaking a sweat with this book.
Yeah.
And I think it's a cracker. The only thing it lacks, and I've checked in the indexes, is there's actually no Hawkwind, which would
Right.
obviously it would need to be added.
Right, we've got to exclude it then. Well, that's a house rule Hawkwind into it.
Yes.
It's interesting you mentioned Mother London, because actually, if you think about my idea of an ideal Moorcockian campaign, right, would be the characters all start off as patients in a psychiatric clinic in London, a mental health clinic in London in the 1980s, and everybody, but it has to be a shared experience, a shared building experience. And I've got to mention, not only did I just play Stormhack over the weekend, but after we put the Stormhack episode out, Tanya on Twitter dropped me a line and said that she'd run a game where she had the players play Melnibonean nobles and noble houses using a system called Houses of the Blooded, which I'd never heard of. So I picked up the PDF and I gave it a read, and I printed it up on DocsDirect. I must say I'm in love with DocsDirect for printing up PDFs when you can't get things in print. It really is a great service. But she ran a game for us and we played it last Monday night, and it was super, super collaborative, and it very much heavily relies on the players taking over the narrative to a degree. So the players can directly influence what's going on. So it takes a really engaged and generous GM to do it justice, because the GM cannot be fixated on what their story or what their scenario is. They've just got to put together a framework and let the players' imaginations run wild. So if you used an approach like that, and everybody started off as patients at a mental health clinic in London in the 1980s, and actually the delusions are actually the wild extremes of Moorcock's multiverse and are actually real to those people, but that psychiatric clinic is used as a framing device to kick off the story, and then the campaign can go off in any different direction. That to me would be a bob-on Moorcock game, obviously with a bit of Hawkwind thrown in. So since Tanya did Houses of the Blooded, and since I played it, and I played a lot of one-shots over the last couple of years, and that was one of the most rewarding gaming experiences I've had in a long, long time. A long, long time. It was really fantastic. And the players, Loz played as well, and the other two players I'd never met, and they were both excellent as well. They'd played it before, so they knew what was coming. So it was a bit more of a leap for me, and I think probably a bit more of a leap for Loz. I mean, I speak for Loz because he isn't here, because he blew us out. But it was a bit more of a leap for us because it was so different. Such a different way of doing things. And it was really quite exciting. Really quite exciting. But you'd have to have that engaged player group who know that this is an expectation. That it wouldn't be a game where... And I'm not saying this is a bad thing, because our home gaming group, a couple of the people on board, I wouldn't use the term passengers, but they're there for the social experience, they're there to hang out, they enjoy the game, but they're not massively active players in the game. There's nowhere to hide in a game like that. The game is as good as what you bring to the table. And that was a really interesting experience. And I think that would work really, really well. Not necessarily that specific system, but that sort of ethos of what the game is about, that shared experience and shared storytelling. And then you can bring whatever you want to that, whether that be, the Oswald Bastable approach, whether that be the Dance at the End of Time approach, whether that be a 2-week-long party at Ladbroke Grove, any of those things, the Black Corridor, the Sundered Worlds, any of those things, all of them can play into it. And actually, a player can take the lead in creating this element of the world, and then it's the GM's job to make it happen for everybody. And I think that would be a really, really good approach. But it would take some doing, and it would take the right bunch of players to do it.
Yeah, I can see it being incredibly challenging. It's not it's the kind of game we used to occasionally have, back before jobs and children and stuff. where it would be
Jobs.
go off to someone's for a weekend and you're playing for the weekend. I think that's what it would be, because it sounds like it would almost be starting off as a therapy session.
Yeah.
It's a group session, really.
Yeah.
And
yeah,
you'd have to build upon that. I can see it. If it worked, it would be fantastic. It would be one of those games where you would remember it for the rest of your life, and you would evangelize about it to people and say just how amazing it was. And if you ever try to repeat it, it would go very badly wrong if it went that well to begin with.
Yeah.
I could see it being very, very tricky, but at the same time, that's pretty much exactly what I'd be looking for from a Moorcock game. You know, it's that exploration of the world.
Yeah.
And it's your world. It's not Moorcock's world. I think that's probably part of it. Is it's taking. You're not playing the Young Kingdoms. You're playing. This is our world that we're creating there.
Yeah. So it's taking a cue, isn't it, and then running with it.
Yeah.
Graham, were you about to come in?
Yeah, sort of the way you describe it, it's almost like it's a sort of almost GM-less type game where you've got the framework, but the GM is kind of there to facilitate that, but not necessarily to control what's going on.
Yeah, but of course that was not even a half-formed idea. So I think there'd be so many possibilities, but yeah, it would be incredibly difficult to actually implement, particularly since we've all got jobs and families, and we can no longer just take acid and spend the weekend free-forming it and seeing where things go. So yeah,
I did a I did a role-playing game once where all the characters started off as amnesiacs in a clinic, which I borrowed from Nine Princes in Amber.
Yeah,
Roger Zelazny, where the character wakes up and he doesn't know who he is, and you can just start throwing ideas at them. So I had them suspicious of, are we important? Are we not important? Why are we here? What's going on? And then I was able to dribble memories at them and leave them. When they went back to their various dwellings, there were cryptic notes, and it worked incredibly well. But what I was doing was I was basically building it from, I had no idea who they were either. I was kind of J.J. Abramsing it, really, hoping that good ideas would come to me as we played, and everything came from them, and it was fantastic. And their characters, in the end, it was one of the best campaigns we played, and they created their characters on the fly without knowing. With me just throwing random stuff at them.
Yeah. So it's a really exciting way of playing, doing things like that, really trying something different. And it does make me pine for the days when you were able to maybe invest a little bit more time in these things and worry less about real life and the real world getting in the way. Because, of course, as we've found over the last few weeks, just getting all five of us to the table every fortnight to play this game, and I think every GM on Twitter at the moment would say the same thing, and it's not because of anything other than real life takes precedent in the way that it didn't do when you were 15, which is kind of annoying in some ways. I'd love to be 15 again and going through all of this again. But there's many things I'd love to have my time again and do slightly differently, or even do exactly the same way, because that's part of getting old, isn't it? Is reflecting back and thinking, I wish I could do it like I used to do it. For example, today my character fell through a floor by fluffing his dexterity roll despite having the highest dexterity in the party, did his knee in, and I thought, well, this is quite ironic because I actually did my own knee in, so I kind of felt like I was LARPing because I can't even sit still without fucking my knee up in front of this desk, but in a spectacularly unheroic fashion, I blew my knee out getting off the sofa. not falling through a floor in a deserted city near Rollin Crenard. Oh no, getting off the fucking sofa. That's how I did mine, Ian. Good Lord. Terrible. So we've got a pretty good idea of what we would like from a game. Notwithstanding the fact that the idea about the patients in the psychiatric clinic and everything else is probably a tall order, given what we've kind of discussed. But in terms of, I think it's more than achievable to either find a system or just kit bash a system or hack a system to do exactly what we've just discussed, which is a game which takes into account all of those elements. So there's key things like his wilder, more weird, out there conceptual science fiction. Things like Black Corridor, Behold the Man, Dances at the End of Time, Warlord of the Air, the Oswald Bastable books, Jerry Cornelius books. Maybe we should be thinking, forget the swords. Let's go for needle guns and airships and power rings and, intrinsically powerful characters in increasingly bizarre situations.
Yeah, I was going to say, I mean, needle gun, obviously, it covers the Hawkwind bit as well.
Yeah. Yeah, it does. Yeah, so maybe we should be playing Psychedelic Warlords, the role-playing game. Roll your character class. I am a veteran of the Psychic Wars. Yeah, I'm a warrior of the Edge of Time, or I'm a veteran of the Psychic Wars, or yeah.
Yes.
So maybe what we should be doing is Hawkwind Stroke Blue Oyster Cult, the role-playing game. Yeah.
Queens of Deliria.
Yeah.
Will be our first expansion.
Yeah. Maybe. Right. Here's an idea. I'm going to throw this one out there. Now, I'm not suggesting that if we do proceed beyond this Stormbringer game, which I hope we do finish, because I, despite everything we've said, I am enjoying it. I am a little bit in love with Stormbringer 3rd Edition. For all of the reasons we've criticised it, I am really enjoying it. But maybe the next game should be the Deep Fix, the RPG. And then we'll spin it out from there. We'll take that core concept, the Deep Fix RPG, and we'll see where it goes. But we're gonna have a discussion further down the line about who might want to pick that up and take it on as a GM. How does that sound?
Yeah, my hand's staying down on that one. I'd be happy to play, but yeah.
Because Loz has got together. I think he's been working on a Corum game and a Hawkmoon game. But I think we can definitely line that up for the future. But I'm going to give it some serious thought. And I think, when's the last time you GM'd something, Graham?
Oh Christ! About 30 years ago. But but all my current efforts about GMing is in my Guy N. Smith game that I'm attempting to do.
Yes.
So I'm doing lots of research in that. So I would be reluctant to take on another challenge because that is where my heart is at the moment.
Yeah.
For GMing.
That's fair. And funnily enough, earlier on this afternoon, I was looking through some of my gaming notes on my desktop, and I found a document called Quincy versus Giant Scampy. And I thought, what the fuck is this? And it's those tables we put together on Twitter. When we were talking back and forth on Twitter about randomly generating that mashup game of 70s TV detectives versus giant critters. So I've still got those tables, but yeah, the document's called Quincy versus Giant Scampy.
That sounds like a perfect game.
Fair enough. So,
giant sea creatures ripping Cabot Cove apart, and Miss Marple with a spear gun.
Yeah,
not Miss Marple. What's her name? Oh, Murder She Wrote. What's her name?
Angela Lansbury.
Yes, but her character, I can't remember her character's name, but yes.
Jessica
with a
Fletcher.
Spear gun.
Yeah.
Jessica Fletcher with a spear gun, yes. Yeah. Giant Scampy. Cabot Cove being torn apart. And then obviously you just have the fog rolling in, couldn't you, from a good 70s. Mix it with the brain warping James Herbert fog, mixed in with zombie pirates. And Adrian Barbeau at the Lighthouse.
Yeah,
it's basically an episode of Garth Marenghi, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yes, it is. Yes, spot on.
Yeah. Well, it's the field is narrowing. So, what about you, Neil?
I would love to do it. I'm a massive fan of Hawkwind. I personally know some of them, so I could try and get some ideas together. I would love to do the Deep Fix role-playing game. I really would.
Oh, okay then.
So,
if you're up for it, we might play this round this off in a couple more sessions, and then if you're game for it, and then The reins are yours.
Thank you very much.
Because actually, I've wanted to play your games the last couple of virtual cons, and I've just not managed to hook it up. I booked onto one of them once, but didn't get my first preference and went another game. Not that those games work perfectly fine and enjoyable. And this occasion, I think before I realised that yours clashed, I'd booked onto Ralph's Stormhack game on the back of doing that episode a couple of weeks ago. So. But if I don't have to wait until the next virtual con, and we can actually crack on and we'll play the Deep Fix the RPG, then I will be happy as a pig in muck.
Bishop Beasley with a Mars bar.
Absolutely, yeah.
One thing I'd like to raise about on the Stormbringer rules is the major wounds table.
Oh yes,
which
is wonderful.
I think more rule books should have such things.
Yeah, I think the major wounds table is there to take away the fact that to kind of mitigate the fact that they got rid of RuneQuest's limb by limb damage, because of course in RuneQuest I think it's kind of like sort of a standing joke in RuneQuest that someone loses their left arm every game, because of course if someone even with an average weapon with an average strength bonus rolls an average roll and hits someone's arm, it's coming off. So they got rid of that element, but instead they thought, oh well, it's now far too forgiving, so let's have a major wounds table. Which did we roll on that twice? You missed this, Neil. We had 2 rolls on the major wounds table last game.
I got caught on that.
Yeah.
I'm really sorry I missed it.
Yeah. It reminds me of I'm sure Rollmaster had it.
Yeah, Rollmaster was hilarious, and Space Master as well. They get a spatula.
Yeah.
There is all that remains is a pile of dust.
Yeah, that was the energy criticals table, wasn't it? I remember that. Yeah, energy weapons criticals table. Yeah, it was excellent. Yeah, I regret never playing or running Space Master. I quite liked it because there were a lot of elements of Dune in it with body shields and all that business. There was a lot of nice elements in Space Master, but yeah, nobody ever wanted to play that Roll Master because MERP was bad enough in terms of complexity. But
yes,
and funny enough, there was a conversation on Twitter a couple of weeks ago about complex weapons systems, and someone brought up Phoenix Command.
I remember Phoenix Command.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
We discussed using that as a drop-in combat system.
Yeah.
It was the tail end of the 80s. So excess was all abound.
Apparently, they were actually rocket scientists, weren't they?
Yeah.
But when that system failed, they went back to being rocket scientists.
That's right. Yeah. And I think that's one of the reasons.
We played one evening of leading edge aliens.
Yes.
And we didn't even encounter an alien. We were Marines. We arrived on LV 425 or whatever it was, and it was just a couple of settlers who were left alive with guns, and they pinned us down, and we exchanged about 3 or 4 volleys each. It took 5 hours to do. That was exhausting. And we said, it's not really kind of got the high energy of the movie, has it?
Yeah.
And the GM went, no, it hasn't. No.
I think that's what doomed the first Aliens role-playing game to failure, was being attached to that system. But what I forgot, what I completely forgot until this conversation, was they also got the license to the Lawnmower Man. And they did a Lawnmower Man role-playing game with the same system. And I actually had it at one point in the 90s and flogged it on eBay. But yeah, Leading Edge Games, they must have spent a fortune on these licenses and attached them to that system.
I liked the Living Steel. I've got a couple of supplements for it. Of course, the rule book is ridiculous, but it's a good setting. It's an interesting far future setting that was way more interesting than Traveller, which is very pedestrian, obviously, isn't it?
By comparison, yeah. But while this conversation was going on, I looked to my left and looked at the shelf, and I thought, I'm sure I've still got it. And I pulled off the shelf Edge of the Sword Volume 1, Compendium of Modern Firearms by Kevin Dockery. And have a listen to this. So, damage ratings in Edge of the Sword are based on the tissue disruption caused by a projectile's impact and energy transfer. This is expressed as a 2-number formula. A divided by B, A equals the possible inches of penetration, B equals the cubic inches of disruption per inch of penetration. For example, 9mm NATO ball, 23, stroke, 0.14. This formula can be calculated for any cartridge provided certain statistics are known. Total damage equals, in brackets, ME times CS, close brackets, divided by 10 times BF. ME being muzzle energy, CS being cross-section of the bullet, BF being bullet factor, brackets, see chart. Absolutely ridiculous. But I remember, but fortunately, this is a ridiculous book. An absolutely ridiculous book. The picture of Kevin Dockery is brilliant. He stood there with a grenade launcher and a big pair of sunglasses. But fortunately, as well as having all that nonsense, it did also have a load of damage tables for handguns, submachine guns, battle and assault rifles and sniper rifles for Edge of the Sword, Cyberpunk, Hero System, Call of Cthulhu, Twilight 2000, something called MSPE. What's that? What system's that? No idea. And D20 system. So, and also it would help you... Oh, Mercenary Spies and Private Eyes.
Oh, yes, of course.
Yeah. So, whilst it's a 240-odd page book, fortunately, if you look in the appendices, there are 2 usable pages. Which, could be worse, couldn't it? Could be worse. Anyway, on that ridiculous...
Sorry, one last thing before just the Deep Fix role-playing game.
Yeah.
The picture I'm going to put in the back, I don't know whether anyone's ever seen Lemmy the movie.
No.
At one point, somebody gets him...
Yes.
They get him into a tank, and he's actually firing guns from this tank. That's going to be the picture that's in our weapons section, is Lemmy in a tank.
Yes.
It just has to be done.
I'm buying into that straight away.
It's
Right,
like the documentary which just spends his time drinking Jack Daniels and Coke and playing the quiz machine at the bar.
Yes, playing the poker at the bar, yes. And shopping for CDs as well. It's a fantastic film.
On that Lemmy tank muzzle velocity versus bullet factor shaped bombshell, thank you, gentlemen, for joining the discussion. Thank you for playing the Stormbringer game. And maybe in 6 months' time, we might do this again and talk about the Deep Fix RPG. But for now, that concludes the Breakfast in the Ruins role-playing game Triptych. So thank you all very much.
Cheers. Thank you.
Massive thanks to Rob, Norman, Graham and Neil for the thoughts and insights, and also to Paul and Laws who were part of that game too. Rob's podcast, Confessions of a Wee Tim'rous Bushi, is on Anchor FM and all other good podcatchers. Playing that Stormbringer game has been a good laugh throughout, and we've also been thinking on gaming in other genres too, and Graham, Neil and I had a little exchange a while back about the late British author Guy N. Smith, even becoming maybe a tiny little bit obsessed with him for the last couple of months. Guy passed away back in December 2020, but it just so happens that this week a new Twitter account launched that's promoting his work and fronting a move to revise the Guy N. Smith website, launch a newsletter, and keep his extensive works in print, and in many cases get them back in print for the first time in quite some years. Now you can follow that account at GuyNSmith1 on Twitter and get on the mailing list by emailing blackhillbooks@gmail.com. Ever since Phil and I covered the rats for Halloween last year, Guy's work has been chipping away at the edges of the Breakfast in the Ruins itinerary, and I'm sure we'll take a look at something crabs related at some point this year. In other news, Dave Dempster, aka the Tentacled Whisperer, sent me a magnificent Eternal Champion t-shirt. Cheers, Dave. I've mentioned the band Eternal Champion before on the show, and they are very tasty indeed. On the subject of music, in the next couple of shows I'll be talking to Dave Washman about his rock project Cernus. Now, we played Cernus on the last birthday episode, but it was really great to hook up with Dave via VidLink to California and talk about his music and influences in more depth. I'll also be talking to the experimental electronica artist Imria, so if you want to do some homework ahead of that, check out their Bandcamp pages and support their epic music. Right, time now to thank our marvellous patrons. First up though is Miles Reed Labato. I missed Miles off the list on the last show because I'm a goofball. So, Miles, aka the Viceroy of Coffee, massive gratitude for your support. You arrived on the scene just in time to take in the delights of Dayness, and I think that definitely marks you as having a particular level of masochism given that you didn't immediately withdraw your support afterwards. In fact, that goes out to all of you. Tash still hasn't forgiven me for forcing her to read Dayness. Fortunately though, we did manage to find a taker for her copy of the Dark Straits of Reglathium. Well, I say find, it was more of a direct appointment really, so unlucky Graham. I've still got 3 copies in my house, and because I'm something of an idiot, I went ahead and picked up Mike Sirota's revision, The Black Seas of Maldrinium. I haven't read it cover to cover, I've only lightly skimmed it, and I can confirm, yes, the typos have been addressed. But on the other hand, the 5 pages of Favor have not. Nor has the description of the size of some breasts as being beyond belief. Or has the rampant use of invented illogical units of measurement. But the glossary has swollen from 2 pages to 7. So swings and roundabouts, I suppose. Mostly swings. Shit swings, to be fair. Anyway, salutations to the Chaos Engineers, hard at work throwing the Diklon drive overboard. Andrew Ciclunus, Andrew Van Ness, Ben Fletcher, Dave Washman, Fred Quiche, Jim Kirkland, John Lays, John Timothy Watt, Mal Pertwee, Nelbert, Simon Perrins, Robbo, and Tony Malazzo, and to our Jugaderos, sweating their way through a high-stakes session of an old Hull card game called Shithead, the loser's punishment being a gift set of all 5 volumes of the Danish saga. They are Alexander Harris, Clarkey, Craig Ledley, Ian Stead, Loz, Taylor, Matthew Broom, Randall Gatlin. Cheers for the beer, Randall. I'm saving that one for the next show with Loz, where it will be revealed in all of its terrifying syrupy glory. Stephen Round, Miles Reed-Labato, of course, Tom Murphy. Check out Colossive Press, there's some fantastic new zines on there. And joining us, post-Danus, Gareth Wilson. Welcome to the tables, Gareth. Our thanks too to Tim Cardos, occupant of the spaces between the tiers. And finally, of course, to our patron demons, ever patient, awaiting their time in ascendancy as the cosmic balance swings. Ed Scott and the Blade of Arizona. Graham Holden, a.k.a. the Duck Pond Sailor, a.k.a. Apkalu of Enmakar. Paul Hillary, the Lapsed Gamer, the Grazed-Knuckled Ninja and Counter of Coin. Gemma, a.k.a. Dread Mortmain, smasher of stair-based coronaventions. Nathan Guljas, belter of riffs and guardian of the legacy of Solomon Kane. Neil Burton, the Destiny Knight, sketcher of things and proponent of the emollient qualities of snail juice. To Joe Monty, traveller of interstitial planes and curator of words of power. And once again, I'll remind everybody that Joe's handiwork with the Saga press editions of the Elric Saga are now available for pre-order and they're releasing from September. To Bob Macmillan, arcane master of letters, particularly typewritten ones that invoke warm memories and send me down a rabbit hole of searching out and buying an old Remington Rand because I have no impulse control. And of course to Norman, the Baker on the Rocks, and the OG patron. Okay, enough of my yakking for now. We'll be playing out again with another Journal of Gerard Arthur Connolly inspired track by Nand, and the Nand Soundtracks Bandcamp page is up and these tracks will be available soon, so bookmark it now. The Journal will return in the next couple of months with Chapter 11, and we're still working on our re-recording and re-scoring project for Volume 1, i.e. Chapters 1 to 7. And I understand that the hard copies of Volume 1 of the Journal reached the various parts of the globe they were dispatched to, so it's very cool for me to know that there are copies as far afield as Zurich, Brooklyn, Massachusetts, Tennessee, Melbourne, Australia, Wallasey, and Bruff. Volume 2 will probably be complete in the late summer, so watch out for that. Until next time, you can gab with and follow us on Twitter and Instagram on the handle @BreakfastRuins. You can email the show at breakfastruins@outlook.com. The blog is breakfastintheruins.com. We have our Patreon page too, that has a few Patreon exclusives. But in the meantime, take care, stay safe, and I'll see you all again soon on the Moonbeam Roads.